When you dare to share, you break the silence. When you dare to share, you speak your truth. When you dare to share, you use the full strength of your voice. When you dare to share, it brings opportunity to own your story. So tell it, be heard, and at the same time, your sharing is someone else's learning, inspiration, motivation, empowerment, and hope. There's always an element to each of our stories that remains a secret. For some, we feel it's a dirty little secret. Dare to share your untold story exposes these secrets in a welcoming and positive way. I encourage each of you out there to dare yourself to share what is yours to tell. When we dare, it is the courage to do something really important. Let this be a vow to each and every single one of us that we take risk, we brave, confront, and face what is, while inspiring and empowering all communities. So let's break that silence and tap into mental beauty. This is Salima Jadavji, your podcast host, a practicing social worker, and your mental wellness connoisseur. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast, episode number 100. Behind the scenes with Salima as the journeys of untold stories are uncovered and rediscovered. To all my fellow listeners, before we get started, I'm just dropping in a note to give you a heads up that this podcast might be emotionally triggering for you. We do invite guests onto the show who share openly about extremely difficult life moments with exposure and impact of what the struggles have been like. The intensity of each episode could have a variable impact on your emotional and mental well-being based on your own personal story. If at any point the topic becomes uncomfortable or upsetting to you in any way, please do not pressure yourself to listen. Instead, be kind to yourself, do some self-care, and perhaps give another episode a try. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Dare to Heal's very own digital ninja, Shirley Brooks, as a guest on the show today. However, we have flipped the script, and Shirley will be the one doing all the question asking, and I will be placed on the hot seat as I unveil all things behind the scenes of our show to date, added with some sprinkles of personal reflection. So let me start by giving Shirley the proper introduction that she deserves. Shirley is a mother, wife, mindset coach, and business strategist for introverts and multi-passionate women who need help to come out of their shells and boost their confidence and monetize their unique genius. Shirley comes from 20 plus years of experience in the logistics and supply chain industry and decided to stop blaming herself for her discontentment in her career and took the steps to become an active co-creator of that life that she has stepped into. Her goal is to empower women and outfit them with tools they need to succeed and make the impact that they desire. She believes the skills which are learned in the corporate environment combined with natural talent, lived experience, passions, and abilities perfectly set the tone for women to take back their power so women no longer feel they need to adapt to places like male-dominant industries. Shirley aims to create massive impact by increasing female human potential and family quality of life at home by supporting the forward motion of 10,000 global, independently, wealthy, intentional, and holistically healthy women owned and operated brands. Well, hello there, Shirley. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast.
Hello, hello, hello. Thank you for having me. This is so exciting to be in the interview seat.
Must be very exciting for you. I'm not so sure about for me, but but no, all jokes aside, I'm actually really, you're going to use this term excited so much, but I really am excited that you're here with me today to be in that interview capacity to guide me through the special milestone achievement of the podcast, reaching triple digits for the first time, the 100th episode. So, while this is the third time I've put myself on this hot seat for this podcast, as I mentioned, I'm extremely grateful to have you, Shirley, take time out of your day and your full schedule to support me along this journey and support the mission of what I am aiming to achieve. I am gracious for your presence, not just for today, but for all the support you have provided to Dare to Heal since you've come on board. Up until now, each podcast guest has taken time to show up with true authenticity and vulnerability. And I believe our mutual goal is to take a stance together to break the barriers of mental stigma. What makes today a little bit different is the opportunity to reflect on 99 episodes and all things behind the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast. Taking stock, reflecting, and slowing down are all part of the growth and future direction. So here we are, making it to the 100th episode, and I am proud of the journey so far. So, Shirley, this is it. Take it away. I give you permission to take over and be that question asking geek for today.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. It is definitely something to be proud of to be at
Mm-hmm.
your 100th episode.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. Not that many people can say that yet. So we'll get right into the questions. So, speaking of the podcast, when you began this podcast, did you ever think you could get to the 100th episode, or were you even planning to reach 100? Or, were your thoughts even traveling ahead past, like, I don't know, episode 10?
you know, this is really good question to be asking me. Actually, I have something to share about this, So referencing, I would say maybe around the 10th episode being released, actually, it could very well have been before the release of the 10th episode, but somewhere in that really beginning, early stage, I would say that a colleague of mine, a really close friend as well, had called me and shared that whenever she's driving, she listens to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast. And I was so, I felt so great that, people were listening, because it's one thing to like get the whole podcast out there, release the episodes, but then you never know if someone's listening. So it was nice to hear that part. But then
Mhm.
we were talking about just being impressed with, I was impressed with myself for being able to get to that place of learning about what it means to do a podcast like this one, and in doing the whole interview process and getting all the details of the behind the scenes organized and sorted out and worked out. And I did the recordings and started the process of posting it on social media and getting the podcast out there. And at the time, I was having episodes released on a weekly basis. We were talking about that whole process of how I had done so much in a short period of time. And then somehow our conversation shifted to how I think it was maybe myself who said that I was listening to something online and they were talking about their 100th episode. And instantaneously, like without even letting me finish saying my thoughts, she'd said, well, that's going to be you, like in no time. And to be honest, I was like, really? You think I can do that? I don't even know if I know how to do this really, you know? She was very clear in the way she said it. So I guess what I'm trying to say is when I had the idea to launch the podcast, I knew it needed to be done and I was ready to do it. I didn't hesitate. I didn't always know what I was going to be doing or what the next step was, but I was assured that this is what I needed to do. And I was going to roll with the punches and allow myself to be comfortably uncomfortable and do it perfectly imperfect, just like the Dare to Heal model. But now I just don't think I was able to even fathom the idea that I could take it far. I didn't know what to expect. I had no idea. I knew I wanted it to be an important podcast that was consistent and that I didn't give up on even if things got tough, which at times it did, and that I saw a future in it. But I guess the number 100 itself did not cross my mind in that way. But when she said it and I saw how she said it with such sincerity and conviction, I thought to myself, okay, wow, 100 episodes. When will that be? Because that's going to be a long time away, but it would be so cool to get there. So I guess that's where my thoughts went. I was totally down for it, and I was really letting myself get curious about what it would be like to get to this point. And I'm here now, and I'm just in awe, like in a little bit of disbelief, I'd have to say. And when I'm thinking about this, I truly get mesmerized, not just that I did it with hard work, blood, sweat, and tears, but that guests themselves continued to show up in different ways and would come forward and lead with, their bravery and courage and inspire and empower others to do the same. So I didn't know how it was going to happen, but here we are, Shirley.
Yes, cheers, cheers, cheers. It's really a good thing. And I think when you say the thing about guests continuing to show up, I think you make it really easy for people to feel comfortable to come and tell their
Oh, that's
story.
nice to hear.
Hmm. So, do you feel that you have been fulfilling the original intention of the podcast? And how do you know? Like, how does it show up?
How do I know I have been fulfilling the intention of this podcast? Well, for me, the main purpose of this podcast has always been to educate and inspire the audience with the sharing of untold stories and raw conversation. And this is not a monetary gain podcast to date. This has been meant to give to the community something to help gain strength, courage, and bravery for people while educating and bringing hope to those who need it in our communities. In fact, for me, it's an investment in people that I have wholeheartedly spent because I have always wanted this to be a resource for people to have, regardless of who they are, where they come from, or what they do or don't have. And I find that the storytelling method, which I never considered as an experiment, I just know that storytelling has always done well. And it speaks to itself given that our subscribers listen and our downloads increase and people know the podcast and people reach out to me as a result of the podcast getting out there. I feel that all the engagement and conversation continues to be authentic. I feel the message of breaking down barriers of mental stigma is my big mission and my hopeful mission to have that continue. And I have been bringing forward a trend called the mental beauty rethink. So I do believe that the initial intention of the podcast is like consistent throughout and has remained unchanged.
Speaking of mental beauty rethink, which when I think about the mental beauty rethink and when I was on my recording, I don't remember what I said for the answer of what I think mental beauty is. I think I said something about it being, for me, it was about authenticity. But when you said it, it was like little explosions, like aha moments just go off, like, oh
Mm-hmm.
my gosh, that is crazy. Like mental beauty rethink. I love that. I love the mental beauty piece. So that was big for me. I think every time you ask somebody, it's a big deal to them when they hear it. Like before they can answer,
Mm-hmm.
they're just so blown away by the concept of
Mm-hmm.
mental beauty because we live in this society where everything is so about aesthetics or whatever's going on the outside. But it's really important also to consider what is going on inside. It's a very unique concept that you brought forward.
In my quest about breaking down barriers of mental stigma, it's really all about embracing the way we humans choose to view it. By embracing the mental beauty rethink, this is an opportunity to provide an invitational approach to viewing it. So, when it comes to mental well being, there are so many negative connotations associated with it. And mental health is seen in silos of physical health. People are quick to think in terms of comparison, good or bad, right or wrong. And there's such a great deal of judgment that lingers behind any of the terms interchangeably, whether you're saying the words mental health, mental fitness, mental well being. Just think about all the random thoughts and uneasy thoughts, negative ones and uncomforting ones that you could experience. I know I do. I have. And I also see the temperature in the room, like, the emotional temperature in the room of people. It changes as soon as you bring up something like this. So I just wanted to bring forward a term that could eventually become a trend as a new way to see mental well being, where we can equalize mental well being with physical well being and normalize it so we can really start talking about it authentically without all the fear and stigma associated with it. So, my hope and my aim is for people to be able to see this as a new way just to talk about mental health, just to talk about their mental status, to talk about their mental impact without it having so much stigma attached to it. That invitational approach is meant to invite people to feel more comfortable. When I think of the words mental beauty rethink, to me, it's an intentional way of, having a new way of life, like full of unconditional acceptance of yourself and others, and normalizing mental well being. So it doesn't have to look a certain way. Whatever it is fully accepted. So moving away from that judgment and just equalizing the weight of both physical and mental well being. So, actually, since we are talking about mental beauty, I just want to say, whoever's listening to this episode, which I hope you'll listen till the end, but towards the end, I do have a small surprise that I like to be sharing about mental beauty. So I hope you all stick around. That's me and my mental beauty spiel.
Awesome. So tell us about flow. Prior conversations you've had with guests, you
Hmm.
talk about the importance of flow. Tell us more about that and what makes it important for guests to not come prepared with the script. I know I was one of those people that was nervous about not having something to read, fully, right?
Hmm. 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 Yeah, this is a great question. I'm so glad you asked. Okay, so in terms of flow, every episode and guest go through the same introduction, followed by a brief warm up, chat, and about the intentions of the podcast. And I do this each time because I want to reignite the spark for both of us of what we're both about to get into. The brief conversation about it is a reminder of what makes the conversation so vital. Then we start talking about mental beauty and the mental beauty rethink. And this is probably my favorite part. Hearing the unpacking of someone's story is like the most important part. But aside from that, hearing about someone's thoughts and what are the first things that comes to their mind when they hear the mental beauty rethink words and what comes up for them, like that's my favorite. So that's just, it just gets me excited every single time. There's diversity and richness in the answers and the ideas that come up. They're really amazing how people uncover perspectives and I get to expand on my own. Or even if the description someone gives, it still resonates with what I always thought mental beauty to be, but it's now another way to see it or another way to describe it or another element to add on. I get excited every single time. I tend to ask these guests on the spot, right? So it allows me to see the perspectives that show up, and it's not about thinking about it in advance. It's just what is showing up spontaneously when those words come to you. So I continue to hear unique viewpoints and outlooks, and there is probably less than a handful of times when an answer has actually a similar root. So
Hmm.
that just talks to the diversity and richness. Now, in terms of the rest of the process or flow, my famous trademark question is the newspaper headline of a guest story. So when they are able to come up with the title for their own story, it solidifies it for them. It prepares the audience to know what is coming, and it can pique interest and mentally prepare them to listen the way they need to. And it sets the tone for how we can allow the story to unfold through a raw conversation. And then we proceed to get right into the story. During that part of the process, I listen carefully. I become a question asking geek myself. As I get so entrenched in what I hear, I become Curious George, let's say. But after I learn about the story, how they coped through it, what went on, how they were affected, all the impacts, and where they are on their journey, and perhaps what they have gratitude for or lessons that came up, I always go back to understanding the story from the lens of how their mental health specifically was impacted at the time. Now, if they've already shared or started to share previously, I ask for more or we delve in a bit deeper. However, this is the crux of the podcast, is to talk openly about how your mental health is affected or was affected at the time. A person may not have realized what they were affected by, but in hindsight, when they're able to speak about it, there might be a great deal to tap into and to bring forward as part of their realization. And this is the part where audience can really connect with the guest as well. So this part of the mental health query lets us make the connection to how the physical body may have been affected, cognitively what may have been brewing, emotionally what may have been experienced, And it allows us to capture the full essence of the story and the experience, which makes the raw conversation as authentic as it can get. Then we obviously have more things to talk about. I mean, this podcast is jam-packed with all kinds of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But what we do is we proceed into important messages for the listeners, what inspires them, who they want to shout out to, how they're findable, and then closing up the conversation. Sometimes there's a brief reflection. But yeah, that's what the flow is all about. There is a structure. It's a loose structure with a particular flow. And that's what allows it to be consistent yet spontaneous. Now, the important thing to remember here is that since you asked about why guests shouldn't come fully scripted, that's because if they do that, they're relying on words, not their full truth, not their story. They get fixated on the script in front of them, and it takes away from allowing in the spontaneity and free-flowing conversation, particularly a raw conversation. On more than one occasion, even like you mentioned, but not really quite, I still wouldn't be thinking of you when I'm thinking about this. But, there's guests who have attempted to script all of their answers, Shirley. And if I ventured off into my curiosity world, which, happens so naturally for me,
Mm-hmm.
I would get reactions like, wait, I wasn't prepared for that question, or I don't have any notes about that, or I didn't know you were going to ask that. And I'm not referencing anything that we previously discussed that, okay, these are things that would be off the table from talking about. Anything that was a predetermined boundary in place that's not okay to delve into. That's not what I'm talking about. These are just follow-up questions or other aspects of questions. And I would see these guests struggle as much as they did. And I was like, oh boy. So that's why scripting is a no-no.
Well, when I think back to my particular episode, even though I had an idea of what I wanted to talk about, I do remember some of your questions. I didn't feel as prepared. It was really, like you said, follow-up questions to what you were asking me. And I think that you do a really good job of making it feel like it's just a flow, like a conversation. And if this is my truth, I'm naturally going to just be able to share.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important when we talk about mental beauty and mental health to also find ways to come out of our comfort zone, even if it's,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, imperfectly perfect, right?
Perfectly
So,
imperfect, yeah.
yeah, perfectly imperfect. So,
Yeah.
and that's what that does. It's like almost
Mm-hmm.
a therapeutic session in a way. You come out of it grown an inch or a centimeter or
Mm-hmm.
something.
And for
Mm-hmm.
people who are curious about your episode, it's episode number 51, by the way. And the title of your podcast, was What She Did to Thrive and Excel in a Male Dominated Field. Just putting it out there.
Have a listen. It's like you said, it's one of those things where like you don't know what's happening when you're going through it, but after you go through it, you can find all the
Mm-hmm.
lessons, and it's worth it to just go back and reflect. So let's
Mm-hmm.
talk about, I think you called me the digital ninja or something like that when you
Yeah,
introduced
yeah.
me. And in my world, we tend to ask people to go in a lane, be in this specific spot because it's going to be so much more helpful for whatever the reasons are, right? So we tend to say things like, you should be talking to only women or whatever it is, right? And your podcast, it's not a gender focused podcast. When you
No.
speak to guests, it's not, oh, I'm only trying to target women or something like that. Can you speak
Mm-hmm.
about guest gender and if that is important to you in your podcast quest or, why or why not?
Yeah, I can speak about it, and I'm glad you asked. Well, so for me, this podcast is all about, like, the main mission is breaking down the barriers of mental stigma, or at least, putting a dent in it, right? Like,
Hmm.
it's a big mission. And I believe that the way females are impacted is quite different than how males are impacted. And we can learn from each other, and we all need to still have a safe space for all the genders to be able to come forward. Otherwise, we're just having stigma within stigma.
Oh, stigma within stigma. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that was good.
Yeah, I just thought about it on the spot. It's just kind of how it came up. But no, but stigma within stigma, right? So just think about how we have stigmas of how we assume women cope and how we assume men cope. So those are all stigmas, right? So I do see that it is more popular for women to come forward to tell their stories on this podcast, even though that doesn't make it any less difficult for them. In fact, I see it as a real act of courage and bravery, and really willing to take the risk and exposing themselves and being true with their stories. And I see that women are ready, and women are supporting women. More women are in leadership, and they are ready to do things differently and take different risks and be their own voice. Some women have been able to cheer, each other on, or, come to their own realization just from breaking free from old patterns. And with males, for men, what I see is that it's a bit more difficult for them to come forward to tell their stories, whether it's difficult or less common. What I see is that what is typical, just in terms of the stereotypes and the stigmas that I was just mentioning, right? Stigma and stigma. So these ideas that, men don't have the ability to emote in the same way as women, so there's that comparison. Men are not able to tap into their feelings or, talk about their feelings. Men are supposed to be strong. They're not supposed to show up with vulnerability. So all these assumptions and narratives play a role in influencing genders and how these people are going to decide to come forward to share their story. And I think for a long time, like men, the safety they experience is different when women might be feeling vulnerable in a different way and have felt unsafe. There's still that conversation of women are talkers, they're more emotionally connected, women are able to talk about their feelings. So there's all these comparisons and all these predetermined thoughts of how the two genders operate that makes it difficult. So I truly just want this podcast to be all about all individuals who are able to come forward, who are willing to come forward, who are willing to break down their own barriers and come forward. And yes, on our podcast, this podcast, we have more females that have come forward so far. Regardless, we are still welcoming males. So as they're able to come forward, we welcome them. They're willing, they're able to. So we do the same thing for them when they're able to show up. And we just hope that over time it will encourage others to come forward and males to come forward in larger numbers as well. So for me, I don't really look for the podcast to be gender specific. I just want it to be available to all people so we can break down all the barriers of why mental stigma is what it is. And I want people to feel that they can be part of breaking it down, and they can all be part of embracing mental beauty, and they can all be part of this new way of living, being, and accepting.
I love it and I get it.
Mm-hmm.
I do in my household anyway. I'm the only woman. There's my husband and my son, and that is something that does come up a lot. Even when you, as a parent, set up the environment where you're like, it's okay for you to be vulnerable, son. It's okay for you if you need to cry, if you need to talk, whatever it is, it's okay. There's still that, I guess, society still has that influence, right? Of it's not okay to be vulnerable. And so, obviously coming on here for anyone is a true act of courage.
Oh, yes.
When the guys do it, it's also something to be said because, like you said, not everybody feels comfortable letting their guard down and sharing their story and possibly even emoting, and just being vulnerable in that way. But it is awesome that you provide the space.
Well, that's just it, right? I provide the space, but that just still might not be enough for a person, right? Because it all comes down to emotional safety. So it just takes time. So we just continue to encourage and support and hope that, one by one, people will be able to come forward.
Yeah. So we're at episode 100. Out of the other 99 episodes, what have you learned about yourself?
I've learned a lot about myself. I've learned about gratitude for people, gratitude for circumstance, new perspectives. Sometimes I could be stuck, not knowing I'm stuck, seeing things from a certain way, and someone shares something, and I'm like, oh, right. Like sometimes I'm having my own aha light bulb moments for myself, being an interviewer as a podcast host, and someone is sharing something deep about themselves, and going through a learning or an impact, or they've described something that they felt. I'm like, oh, that's what it is. Like, it's like you didn't have maybe words for it, or you didn't have a proper description, or like the impact or the learning from it. I'm like, oh, that's a really neat way of looking at it. So by really being exposed to, all these stories, I actually learned new ways to express myself from time to time.
Hmm.
And I have learned that, I think I always knew that I can do hard things. It reiterates that, hey, I have learned that I can do hard things, and I am doing hard things, and things I never thought that I would be doing or could be doing, I am doing. There are a lot of like episode emergencies that have happened. I wouldn't say a lot, but there have been a fair share. And just learning how to pivot in the moment and being able to like roll with the punches and, figure things out, whether it's a tech issue or a person issue, or you're about to record and the person's like not showing up, not responding.
Mm-hmm.
There's just so many different things, or, someone on the podcast that doesn't want to be on the podcast. There's so many different things that come up. Something else that I've learned about myself is that, basically I can teach myself things that I never knew I could be capable to even learn. So that's huge. It's it's a reminder. And when I stay focused on my goal and I have clarity, really I can execute anything. It's just a matter of deciding for myself, just because I can do these things, do I want to be doing them? Do I need to be doing them? Are they important for me? But if it's a goal, I can do it. And I've also learned that I have this ability. I don't know if I should be proud of it or not, but I now recognize how much uncertainty I can endure and juggle. It does take a toll on me, but I've certainly learned that about myself, that like I've got grit.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say so. Like you were saying, the different things that could possibly happen in terms of, tech issues. You make the best plans and life, does some totally different. People maybe
Yeah.
not showing up, people changing their mind, things like that. And, when you said that you're not only can you execute anything you put your mind to, but you can stay focused. Episode 100, hello. That
You're right. You're
takes a
right.
lot to get here. So definitely
Mm-hmm.
pat yourself on the back for that.
Ah, right.
So tell us about some of your personal growth moments as it relates to the podcast and the Dare to Share Your Untold Story.
Yeah. Okay. Podcast growth moment would be when people reach out to me and say, hey, can I be on your podcast? One guest I recall reached out to me on social media and asked me, of course, I know her. And she said, what are you waiting for? Why is it taking you so long for you to ask me? I want to be on your podcast. And I thought she was too famous. Like I thought how can I ask someone like her? But
Mm-hmm.
this is Rishma G from episode 23. And her episode title was Grieving in Gratitude and Sitting with the Discomfort. She lost her husband to cancer, and it was quite a journey for them.
Mm.
Them meaning like her and her family. But, like the fact that she asked me, I was like, wow, you're so famous and you do so many things. I didn't know that it was an option really to ask her. So when people reach out on the LinkedIn platform, sometimes they tell me they heard a podcast or an episode and that got chills down their spine because the episode related so closely with their own. And then they ask things like, I don't know if my story can be shared if you already have the same topic. I remember Belinda from episode 53. Her episode is growing up with no voice and feeling the grief and pain that led to find her voice. First of all stories are welcomed and encouraged. And then even when a story touches you, it's something in the relatability that is gravitated towards, because I'll tell you, the stories are very different. So this is like the true essence and victory of what the podcast aims to do. While one individual's bravery and courage to share their story inspires another to feel safe and come forward to do the same. So those are real growth moments, right? Someone asking me, when are you going to ask me? People coming forward and saying, hey, this sent chills down my spine. I think my story is the same. I'm inspired. I want to come forward. I didn't know I would want to do this, but I want to do this, right? That's huge. So when all that happens, by default, it encourages more stories to be told, allowing people to step out of their comfort zone and break the barriers of mental stigma. I've also had some guests who've come on twice. Asante Houghton. He's been very big as a mental health advocate in this space. And he showed up for episode 22, and then later on with even more vulnerability for episode 44. We also had Karima Jaffer show up in her first episode, number 35, and then later on as episode 86. She was going to show up sooner, but then life turbulence came up, and she still reached out a third time and said, hey, still want to do it, and now I have even more to share. So there are also others who are contemplating now to come back and share another round. So that speaks volumes on its own. Something else that's a growth moment is learning that some people, no matter how well spoken or what success they've achieved, may not be ready to share their story. And that's a great learning for me. That some people still want to mask their identity and they have difficulty breaking free from shame, not just a mental stigma, but whatever it is they have endured that makes it their untold stories, or protect their identity in some way. And for me, that is a reflection of noticing of how emotionally unsafe a person feels. What people are experiencing in society is so fear-driven, and that is why I hope to continue to break down these barriers one by one, piece by piece, layer by layer.
All right. How about what you're most proud of? What is your proudest moment when it comes to this podcast of yours?
You know, I think just knowing that I got here to episode 100, that people continue to come forward with the possibility that I might very well be making a small dent in mental wellness, and that stigmas may lessen with more stories that are told, and that we can continue to spread the word and use the cycle of resourcing to keep the podcast and its guests going in a fluid manner. I think that's my moment.
Okay. So, going to ask you to get a little bit personal or more personal with us
Mm-hmm.
today.
Mm-hmm.
You talked a little bit about stigma and mental health. What was your perspective on mental health growing up versus now?
Okay. Ah, well, remember, it was just my perspective growing up. Okay, so it's not the perspective I hold now, but I mean, it's just what I was exposed to or not exposed to, right? So I thought it was something to be shameful of. Growing up with cultural influences and gender differences, being raised as the only girl in my family, I would not feel comfortable to even show my own emotions. I would be teased by my family if I had any upsets. I was told, "Oh, you're just being a crybaby." So if my mental health wasn't doing so well, I didn't even know that it was a thing. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I think I grew up feeling that it was a bad thing. And I grew up learning about my grandmother who who may have suffered from undiagnosed schizophrenia. I'm not 100% certain, but it is it is spoken about very little. Apparently she had bouts of paranoia. And, I was just 2 years old when she passed away, so I don't have any moments of recall of my own. But I know that was happening. And some family members would tell some stories or describe things that happen in the family outside of mental health. But, there were some descriptors of mental health that would come out in the stories, and I'd be like, oh, that's odd. Or how does that make sense? And you just don't know. But when I would think mental health, I would think institutionalized when I was a bit older, like a teenager or something.
Mm-hmm.
I was exposed to language like, they are less fortunate. Don't act that way. People will think you are,
Mm.
ABC, XYZ. So my aunt also lived with us for a period of time, and she had some underlying mental health concerns. And I remember at times mimicking her expressions, and my mother would tell me to stop. She worried I would turn out the same, as if it is something that, can get passed on to you in that way, or, I could catch it, like, though it's not contagious, like, catching a cold or a dangerous flu. So I guess my perspective was jaded when I was younger and really young and growing up. And I was exposed to things that I don't think, kids normally are exposed to. I come from a family where fear-based mentality was huge. And because it was not spoken about, there were so many misconceptions that were being passed on to me unknowingly. Like, I don't think my parents and my family members and my extended family meant to do that, but it's all they knew. It's what they knew. They were trying to make sense of things, and they were fearful of things. And so it's like they would say things they probably shouldn't have said or didn't know to not say. or to not expose their child to. So I think that's where my perspective was when I was growing up.
So, what makes mental health important to you personally?
It's everything I live and breathe, Shirley. It is a profession I am so passionate about being in it. And I think if I was exposed to more of the truth and reality and had been adequately exposed and taught more about it, I may have grown up differently, perhaps accepting myself and others more easily and living a life that is with more ease. I am of the opinion that when you know more, even the scary stuff, you have more to work from, decipher, and the ability to make good choices or make good decisions without judgment. So I feel I want to now expose this more and continue to delayer from the stigmas and provide a safer environment for individuals to thrive in.
Awesome. So, what habits do you have to take care of mental health?
I got lots of habits. All right. Setting boundaries with myself and others and still staying connected to people. So it's easy to like set boundaries and then like avoid people, but I stay connected to them. Practicing gratitude. I have a morning self-love routine and a self-care routine. I ensure that I practice daily meditation and daily prayer, prioritizing sleep the best I can, prioritizing myself and focusing on areas that I have control over rather than focusing on all the things I can't control or change. I worked really hard in adopting an acceptance mindset, moving my body in whatever way I can. That always helps to boost mood and improve health too. I'd also say nourishing my body, whether it be a relaxation activity or a nutrition or getting some sun or a massage or a pedicure. I don't look at the pedicure as, oh, pretty toes, which that's always cute, but I'm talking about the pedicure means it's like you're taking care of your skin, your pressure points are being pressed, like there's a moment to honor your feet for all the things it does for you. So, nourishing your body or my body. Journaling in more recent years for me has been one of my go-tos. Even just the willingness to explore interests and hobbies or get back into ones that I used to do, but haven't done for a while. So I try to keep switching it up if I can. I have the ability to limit social media, take breaks from it. I personally have never really been into it in a big way. I'm on there, all things online, all related to Dare to Heal and the podcast, Dare to Share Your Untold Story. So I love taking breaks from it if I can. And I like my breathing exercises. I try to pick one thing a day to focus on in terms of, reiterating calmness. I have a mini trampoline, so I like to jump on it at random times during the day, even if it's just for a minute or two. It's good for lymphatic drainage, but it's a nice mental break from stresses that build up throughout the day. I also communicate my concerns, feelings, and needs to those around me so I don't suffer internally, even if they're tough conversations. And I create a robust schedule that allows me to be effective in my workday that is realistic, planned breaks or rest time, food time, self care time. And I don't use self care as a reward. I plug it into my day like I do for maintaining my own hygiene. So it's just part of the routine.
Wow, you do have a very varied way that you take care of your mental health.
I do.
But that's good. So, what is the biggest challenge you've overcome in your mental health?
Mm, I mean, the biggest challenge, that's hard, Shirley. Okay. I mean, I have overcome physical and medical trauma, emotional trauma multiple times, more than what one should experience in one lifetime, which all took its mental toll on me at various points in my life. But I think the true underpinning of working through it all would be that I have overcome self doubt. If I had never worked through self doubt, it would have been atrociously difficult to show up with determination day in and day out, believing in myself to heal, believing that I have abilities that I can regain and rebuild, and believing that I can still have the future I want, and reminding myself the power is in my hands. Now, self doubt isn't just something you overcome, it can haunt you, revisit you, or show up time and time again unexpected. However, because of self awareness, my own emotional detection system is solid. So the signals are clear, and I pick up on it quickly, and I'm able to take charge. I am able to manage it, and knowing that I have worked through it for the most part, is a very empowering and liberating feeling. I'm going to share something with you. In fact, just last week, I received some not so good news regarding my health, like some further deterioration of one of my conditions, one of my health conditions. And for a short period of time, I was bummed out, like really bummed out. My thoughts were going to all kinds of places. And then a few days later, so meaning just a few days ago, my eldest nephew and I were touching base, and the conversation was fitting for me to share this health update with him, even though I had not shared it with anyone else in my family. Now, just to be clear, my nephew is like a super grown up, like he's an adult in the working world.
Mm-hmm.
He's not a child who I would be burdening, though, of course, I never want to share too many of these sorts of things with him because I don't want him to ever be upset or worry him or derail his happy thoughts in any way. However, because the conversation just went there, I shared that piece of news with him. And while he was sorry to hear about it, he told me, "But I also know you'll defy all odds as usual. You always seem to outperform the doctor's expectations."
Oh.
Yeah. And then I went on to say how I was grateful for his vote of confidence in me. But I said to him that, I didn't think that there was anything I could do to change it at this time. So this is where I think the self doubt bugger was trying to intrude.
Mm-hmm.
And his response was, "Oh, I'm sure you can. I know how serious it must be, but I would still bet on you."
Oh.
Right? And so all this to say is that I had a moment, and then I got a reminder from one of my most favorite people in the world. An even deeper reminder is that because of all the self doubt work, I have become untouchable in so many ways that it shows up externally so people can see how I operate, how I function, what I do, don't do, or choose to do. And with my dear nephew's reminder of who I am, I snapped out of it real quick.
That is a blessing to have, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, you've done the work. It's kind of like a muscle, like your arms
Mm-hmm.
are stronger now because you've been exercising them, but sometimes you feel weak, and it's really good to have that reminder, that external reminder to like snap you out of it and get you back on track. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad that he could be there. Glad that he
Yeah.
could be there.
Yeah. It was just a natural conversation that just led that way.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Mm-hmm.
what is your favorite quote? What about the quote makes it your favorite?
This is a great question. Well, in episode 1, I shared 2 quotes that are really dear to me. But of those 2 quotes, I'm going to share one of them with the audience again. And it's a quote by Maya Angelou. And the quote reads, "We delight in the beauty of the butterfly, but rarely admit the changes it has gone through to achieve that beauty." I'm going to say it again. "We delight in the beauty of the butterfly, but rarely admit the changes it has gone through to achieve that beauty." So, the symbolism of butterflies to me is all about hope, transformation, beauty, and uniqueness and new beginnings. So, what makes this quote my favorite or special to me is the reminder, the metaphor of the butterfly. What we see as beautiful or desirable today is molded through periods of trial and tribulations. It's not an overnight success. It is the journey that shapes you. And in that journey, it is the process that graces us to achieve that true beauty. And the deeper reminder is to become the butterfly is to transform. And to transform, you must take the risks you need while you are cocooning. Because if you don't, you'll suffocate.
Oh my gosh.
So, yeah. So you have to give yourself permission to go through it, believe you can, and then do the doing. And before you know it, even when at times it feels the period of darkness is never ending, it happens. The beauty you create through your process emerges and flourishes.
We can end right here. That was everything. That was
Right.
so wonderful. I love butterflies anyway, and the quote is a
Mm-hmm.
really beautiful quote, but the way that you broke it down is just
Mm-hmm.
wow. I love that. I love that. Really do. Oh my
Mm-hmm.
goodness. Okay. Well, in the last 5 years, what have you become better at saying no to? Like think of things like distractions, invitations, things like that. And what new realizations or approaches have helped you with being able to say no?
Oh my gosh, I love this question because I didn't know how to do this for such a long time. And I think I'm like a master now. So let's see what I can tell you. So anything basically that doesn't feel good for me, I don't say yes to. Anything that has an impact on me negatively, it's not going to happen. I look out for me first, and I do so without even a tinge of guilt. So if I'm invited to a social gathering or function, I let people know I'll get back to them. So I don't even give an immediate reply. I give myself permission to think about it first, make sure it's good for me. Now, if I don't feel that I'm able to go for it, even if it's tempting, I still don't allow the guilt in. I remind myself I'm choosing me first. Now, if someone asks me for help or a favor, again, I tend to ask, when can I let them know by? As I have a few things to check out on my end. And if I'm being pressured to respond like on the spot, I typically let the person know then it's probably best they find someone else since their request is so time sensitive. So I don't give in to the pressures like that. And when I do reply, I let the person know clearly what I can and cannot help with or how I can or cannot participate, and I inform them of my availability. So someone could be like, hey, can you help me with this thing, but could you come at 10 a.m.? And I'll be like, hey, I could help you with this thing, but I can come at 7 a.m. or I can come at 4 p.m. Like I won't just accommodate myself if I can't, because that's not good for me. And for whatever the reason, if there is something I must decline, I just let people know I'm not available or I can't make it, or I wish I was available, or I wish that it would have worked out in my schedule, but I never explain, justify, or rationalize the why or the what is the holdup all about. Like nobody needs to know that. It's unnecessary. So I'm just so clear. Like just don't go there. And for me, it's about recognizing my own needs first and then making it clear in my mind that if I don't prioritize myself, then I can't actually be present for anyone else. And then if I attend or go help out or overextend myself as a result of all of that, then that is my problem. So I need to be responsible for my well-being and be accountable for all my actions. And in my experience, when you don't choose yourself first and you spread yourself thin or lack boundaries in whatever way, resentments build and external blaming becomes real. And it doesn't take much to experience bitterness. So even if I'm declining to go to an event that I originally said yes to because I feel the need to stay home and take a long bubble bath, let's say, I let myself know that that is okay. So being clear, and nobody needs to know that that's why I'm staying home. It's not anyone's business. So being clear with yourself allows you to be clear with others. Like, no, I'm really not able to do that. And just that's it. A great reminder is don't make someone else's crazy about you. And don't let other people that don't matter too much matter too much. And of course, to remind yourself that just because I can, it doesn't mean I do. And the other thing that I would say is important is if I start thinking about people and I start worrying about different things, I remind myself that's not my business. I don't need to wonder why someone's thinking a certain way or what they could be doing. I just tell myself that's not my business. So I can just set that boundary real clear.
Okay, so we need to get all of these on a t-shirt. Don't make someone else's crazy about you.
Yeah. Did you like that one?
Get that one on a t-shirt. And
Yeah.
I think you said, and don't let people that don't matter too much matter too much. That's another
Exactly.
t-shirt.
Yeah.
And a sticky note, a stack of sticky notes all over your computer that say, just because I can doesn't mean I do.
Exactly. And that's not my business.
And that's not my business.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah,
You nailed them.
I love it. So, um, we're almost to the end here.
Yeah.
So what can people expect from you next? Like, what else do you have brewing that's, we're almost at the end of the year here. What's happening into the new year? Get us up to speed.
Well, I mean, there are a few things on the horizon. I'm still sorting out some details and timelines of things. So I'm going to keep some things a secret, actually,
Mhm.
and not tell you right now. But I will tell you a little. How's that?
That
Okay.
works.
Yeah. So I'm in the midst of writing my very own book, unraveling my entire full untold story.
Hmm.
And I don't mean it in a way where, like I imply that what I've shared thus far is incomplete. Like, I've done episode 1 and episode 65 in full vulnerability on this podcast. But the more you unravel and delayer, the more connected you become with yourself and other aspects of yourself. Plus, there's only so much that I can say on podcast episodes. So when I was recording the initial episodes that launched on the first day when the podcast came out back in January of 2021. I mean, I started by leading by example, right? So episode 1, that's my untold story. So that's what I thought was my untold story. And a few weeks later, once things settled, I was talking with my therapist about some stuff, just about me and other things. And the podcast came up, and she's like, I didn't even know you were doing a podcast. And I was like, how did you not know? I've been chatting about this for so long. But I guess I never was chatting with her because, we were talking about other things. And so when I shared all the stuff that was coming up and all the different things that were happening, somewhere in there, a deeper connection was made. And at the time, it felt like it should have been obvious to me about the connection that she helped me make. And it was so simple what she said. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I totally missed out on sharing this. This is such a big part of my untold story. How did I miss this? It's almost like I didn't really tell the untold story properly. What the heck? I was like, what just happened? So it was like a bright bulb switched on in my head during that therapy session. And through guidance, that moment was like, okay, well, I guess I'll just have to make sure that's included in my book then. And when I'm able to get down to business and write it, all these parts are going to be there. So I am now in the early phases of writing. I think this is one that I want to be patient and gentle with myself for in this process, because we are talking about a deep sort of vulnerability here.
Mm-hmm.
And just like any human, the feelings of being raw and exposed and taking the time to digest all parts and process for myself, I need to encompass all of this in the writing journey. So I want to be like very much honoring myself in the entire duration of my writing. So that's on the horizon. Like I said, I don't know exactly the timeline, but I have started it. I have been working on it bit by bit. Now, there are a few other things that will be unraveling, and time will tell. I am in a place where my passion is ignited. I'm on a mission to ensure that all people are taking care of themselves and learning true sustainable self-care. Even those who think they are taking care of themselves and taking good care of themselves or feel they are doing self-care, more is coming on different avenues of connecting and learning these concepts of the true art of self-care from me. There will be a retreat next summer, 2025, for helping professionals and working professionals who will get to immerse themselves in a retreat style while learning all about self-care at its roots. So you get all the pampering of a retreat and learning at its roots of self-care. And there will be some other seminar type 1 to 2 day in-person workshops for those who can't be away for as long. However, we are in a premature stage of planning, so I don't want to say too much without having a more solid idea of how it will all unfold, but it is unfolding.
Well, it sounds like a lot is on the horizon, so everyone stay tuned.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As we get ready to close out, are there any final thoughts you want to share that you haven't had? I know we said a lot of things, but
Mm-hmm.
is there anything you haven't had a chance to share yet?
Yeah, I want to shout out my podcast guests, like every single one of them, because without their willingness to share, we wouldn't have this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And I also want them to know that they took brave steps, which inspired other people's brave steps. So they're literally helping me reach the mission of my podcast, which is fantastic. But I also want to shout out of my podcast guests. So all of the people or organizations that my podcast guests gave a shout out to, because clearly those places or people were inspirational or valuable to them on their journey, which either gave them momentum or helped them pivot or gave them new sense of hope or changed their reality in some way. So without those individuals or organizations, I wouldn't be able to have my podcast guests be my podcast guests.
Mm.
So got to make sure I acknowledge all of them, and also listeners who continue to show up and support. So I know you asked me if I had final thoughts, and here I'm thanking people, but it's just kind of wanting to mention that this is how we keep it going, is by everyone's support and connection. And for all the people who've stayed with me on this journey, it's been awesome. So I guess my request, my ask to the audience is stay with me on this journey. I will be so humbled. Whoever you are that's listening, always choose you. If you choose you, you will do right by you. And when you do that, then you automatically have the ability to do right by others. Do not serve others first. Be selfish. Selfish just means to take care of yourself first. So go do that. Always be your number one fan. Take care of yourself, choose yourself, and the rest just falls into place. Make sure when you're loving yourself and accepting yourself fully, you also do it wholly and completely. And be your true, authentic self fully, wholly, and completely. And that is what I consider pure, unconditional love for yourself. And that is my final thoughts to all of you today.
That is really awesome. I love that messaging of it is okay to be selfish, and that selfish really means taking care of yourself first. You drive it home very well, but it is a message that needs to be elevated all the time
Mm-hmm.
because of society or however you might have been raised and things like that. And especially as women, we tend to think that somebody else is more important or someone else's needs are more important than ours. And
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard to be able to give the way that you need to give fully and wholly, like you say, if you're not fully and wholly given to yourself.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And completely.
And completely. Yes. Don't forget completely. Fully, wholly, and completely. All the
Exactly.
things.
Yeah.
So, Salima, it's typical for you at this point in your guest interview to ask them, guess what, Salima?
What's that?
You just dared yourself to share. Congratulations. Now, of course, this was a different kind of sharing where,
Mhm.
we didn't fully tap deep into your stories, wait for the book. However, we
Mhm.
did tap into the rawness of your process and your thoughts and where this all originates from and showing up authentically for your audience. And I could go on and on and on. But I just want to say congratulations on your 100th episode. You have done it. And I'm super eager to see what more you'll do in the future that we can look back on and say the same thing like, yeah, you did this.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Shirley. I really enjoyed being guided by your thought provoking and reflective questions and helping me to deepen my experience of the journey so far of the 99 episodes, getting me to the 100th episode. It's essential to take time to pause, reflect, and then potentially pivot in a direction that further emulates growth. And I've said this before, sharing is vital in this process. I really appreciate the time you took and the grace you gave me to be in this space as the interviewee of the 100th episode.
Well, thank you. I think I feel special because, like, I'm the 100th interviewee person. um, do you have any final words, words of wisdom, or anything else you want to share with the audience that they need to hear from you? You gave us a lot already,
uh,
but there might be
yeah,
something else.
the only thing it's that I teased y'all at the beginning, like somewhere earlier, and I said that there was a surprise that I was going to talk about a little bit later, and I never talked about it, so I'm going to share it. So I'm ready to let both our guests and listeners know that we are starting on an ongoing series of the podcast that solely focuses on mental beauty intertwined with guest interviews. So, if you've been listening this far, you got to stay tuned as the next episode you listen to is going to blow you away and leave you in deep thoughts and new perspective. And this is all in the mission to contribute to breaking down the barriers of mental stigma. So, Shirley, I can't thank you enough for coming on this as the interviewer for today's 100th episode on the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast. Not only did I have a chance to get into throwback moments, there was opportunity for deep reflection and authentic sharing. And of course, this could not have been the case without your guidance and support. I have so much gratitude for your presence and thank you for being part of the bigger picture of the podcast's mission.
You're so welcome. Thank you again for having me. And like I said, it feels so special being here for episode 100. And who knows, maybe y'all might hear from me again. I don't know. So this is great. Congratulations again. It really is a big accomplishment. And we're all looking forward to what's to come.
So, once again, Shirley, thank you for being part of Dare to Share Your Untold Story and showing up as a helping hand in breaking down the barriers of mental stigma. To all of our listeners, if you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and you want to be part of breaking down barriers of mental stigma, I invite you to go wherever you are listening to the episode and hit subscribe. Leave us a comment or a review of the episode and maybe how you relate to it. To learn more about what we offer, visit www.daretoheal.co. And if you are feeling ready and brave to share, please submit your story by visiting www.daretoshare.co. Thanks for joining in.